The following is a special presentation of NBC 41.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. NBC 41 takes us on a journey into our past, and we call it Kansas City Crossroads. It's a collection of stories about people, places, and events woven through time. Crossroads has captured the story of a Rock Island Railroad agent who rescues passengers from a snowbound train on its way to Union Station during the blizzard of 1957. We revisit the days when streetcars careened through the city. We talk with milkmen who delivered milk for the Country Club Dairy. We learn the history of Kansas City barbecue from some of the legends, and many more. So sit back and enjoy some of our favorite stories about this place we call home.
Woven through time, a tapestry of stories defines who we are and gives us a sense of place. From NBC 41, this is Kansas City Crossroads.
Years ago, before the skyscrapers and suburbs, industries and interstates, Kansas City nearly became extinct, a fossil of a once fledgling town on the banks of the Moody Missouri River. Pulled apart by the Civil War, in 1865, Kansas City was left gutted and spiritless. Kansas City had become, as one historian put it, little more than a crossroads town.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Join us now as we follow the trail of an Irish immigrant whose energy and optimism brought Kansas City back from the brink of extinction.
After the war, Kansas City was dazed and desperately short on capital. Approaching railroads promised financial salvation. Kansas City needed a northern connector badly, but so did the nearby military post of Leavenworth. Kansas City was on a downhill track. Without a connector railroad, it would all but die. One man in Kansas City refused to give up, an Irishman from Galway by the name of Charles Esmond Carney.
It became a real race with the leading citizens of Leavenworth to acquire a railroad. My great-grandfather begged and borrowed $60,000 in private pledges. Just as Leavenworth was about to make a deal with the Hannibal St. Joseph Railroad, he convinced Kansas City into issuing $180,000 in bonds. He raced to Chicago and sold enough bonds so that they could start laying tracks down in Kansas City. He then joined other Kansas Cityans in Washington, where they convinced Congress at the very last minute to allocate funds for the building of the very first bridge over the Missouri River at Kansas City.
Building that bridge over the wild and wandering Missouri River turned out to be the biggest challenge in Kansas City's quest for survival. Currents wiped out pilings and washed away timbers. It took 2.5 years to complete the 1,300-yard-long span. Charles Carney and William Gillis drove the ceremonial last stake on July 3rd, 1869.
My great-uncle, Frank Warnell, was 14 years old when they dedicated the bridge. He and hundreds of other boys sat up on the bluff as they watched the great engine cross the bridge for the very first time. Everyone was there. There were Indians, farmers, 7 governors, ladies under parasols. It was the greatest day in the history of Kansas City.
Indeed, completion of the Hannibal Bridge was the defining moment in Kansas City's early history. The population grew, new businesses sprouted up. Kansas City's reputation as the nation's crossroads was ensured. Carney's legacy has carried tens of thousands of passengers and 1 million tons of freight into Kansas City over the years.
Charles Carney died exactly 100 years ago, but to this day, Kansas City owes a debt of gratitude to the Irishman from Galway who never gave up. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Your attention, please. Rock Island, train number 4, the Golden State Limited from Tucson and Los Angeles, now arriving, track number 19.
For 15 years, Joe Wally's voice bounced from wall to wall here in these grand corridors at Kansas City's Union Station. He was one of Rock Island Railroad's finest. Proud of what he did, proud of his railroad. He'd do anything to make sure his passengers got to where they were going, and on time. But on March 24th, 1957, that simply was not meant to be. Joe Wally was about to cross paths with one of the biggest blizzards in Kansas history.
The alarm came about 10 o'clock at night. Train number 4 is gone, lost, nowhere in sight, no way to find it.
Rock Island's Golden State Limited is on its way to Kansas City. It's been battling a fierce late-season snowstorm all night. Around midnight, it loses.
Turned out that the caked ice under the train braked the train to a halt.
The Golden State and its passengers are stranded near Meade, Kansas. It's cold, dark, and snowdrifts begin to cover the train. Meanwhile, back at Union Station, Joe Wally has no way of knowing where his luxury passenger train is. On board the Golden State, a long, cold night passes into another long, cold day. Passengers grow ill from the lack of fresh air and toxic carbon monoxide in the trapped cars. The rear brakeman knew he had to find help.
The rear brakeman walked back in the blizzard to a pole that had a telephone on it and phoned, and if it wasn't for the brakeman, we would never have known.
Joe Wally could now form a rescue plan.
So we assembled a 12-car train and moved it out to get as close as we could.
At this point, passengers have been stranded for the better part of 2 days. Joe Wally and his crew literally push their way through tons of snow to reach the Golden State Limited. After 12 hours, they make it.
When we reached the train, there were no people. The people had been taken to the high school.
So Joe Wally, armed with a warm train and hot food, heads for the school to address his passengers.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry for this mishap. However, if you're ready to leave, assemble at the door and we'll go right to the train. Well, that's exactly what they did.
The blizzard of '57 was recorded as the worst Midwest blizzard of the 20th century. The storm buried the plains under 14 inches of heavy, wet snow, with drifts as high as 30 feet.
Joe Wally delivered the passengers of the Golden State Limited to their destinations with restored confidence in the Rock Island Railroad, and a few stories to tell their grandchildren about their adventure on the Kansas plains. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. For as long as we've had curiosity, we've wondered about the hundreds of different species of birds flying over our heads. In the 1800s, however, our healthy curiosity was not at all healthy for birds. We studied them by shooting them. But on Christmas Day, 1900, Frank Chapman took the study of birds to a crossroads. On that day, he organized 27 of his friends in 25 locations, and instead of shooting birds, they counted birds. It was the first of what was to become a tradition in North America, as well as Central and South America. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads, and today we're going on a bird count.
At Squaw Creek National Wildlife Refuge, north of Kansas City, Mark Robbins and Brian Barber, along with 45,000 people in more than 1,700 locations, are continuing an almost 100-year-old tradition, the Christmas bird count. They're venturing into the woods, swamps, and marshes on a quest for birds.
Oh, there they are. They're coming down now, right on the horizon.
Mark has been part of this event since he was 13 years old, when he first counted birds at Squaw Creek. Since then, he's become quite an expert on his feathered friends.
Another bald eagle, sitting in a tree, a nice adult.
Now a curator and author on the subject of birds, he has an eagle eye for identifying what he sees through his powerful binoculars.
And what's distinctive about that's that huge white rump, and it's got long, narrow wings and a long, narrow tail. So that's called the Northern Harrier.
It's a balmy 60-degree day, a rare treat for veterans of Christmas bird counts in Missouri.
Look at this, wow. Oh, there's probably 1,000 blackbirds right there. Golly, that's spectacular.
If you look, the birds will dance for you. If you listen, they will call to you. Because Mark's been doing this for more than 30 years, he's particularly good at looking and listening. Other than the thrill of discovery and a near-perfect day with nature, the Christmas bird count serves an important purpose. Birds give us valuable information about our own well-being. What happens to birds may soon happen to us. If a species disappears from an area, it signals something is awry with their habitat. Counts like these helped save the bald eagle from extinction.
Hey, here comes an eagle. It's going to fly right over us.
And today at Squaw Creek, the eagle soars with more than 65 other species of birds identified on this Christmas count.
This is so beautiful. God, fantastic. This is the way they end a count.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. In 1876, the Santa Fe rail line was carrying civilization to the Wild West. But what met passengers along the way was anything but civilized. Undesirable accommodations, even less than appetizing food.
A man by the name of Fred Harvey set out to change that. He believed passengers seeking adventure in the untamed West still deserved a well-prepared meal, served in civilized surroundings. And so, Fred Harvey tamed the Wild West with a fork, knife, and spoon, and an army of women he called Harvey Girls. Fred Harvey's ad was simple but effective. Young women left the familiar comforts of home to become Harvey Girls, farmers' daughters trying to help support their families, others looking for the excitement of travel or the freedom that an independent job offered. Being a Harvey Girl opened up opportunities that young women at the time had never even dreamed of.
You know, they said some people looked down on waitresses in those days, but not the Harvey Girls. They had to have good morals and good reputation. Everything had to be done just right. Of course, some didn't pass the test, so they were let go.
Through the years, books and movies did much to romanticize the life of a Harvey Girl, but the reality was quite different.
Going home and soaking my feet is what I remember the most, because it was very hard work. It was something I was not wanting to do for a lifetime on concrete floors. That kitchen was huge.
One of the rewards for all those long hours was a pocketful of tips at the end of the day. A dime was the customary tip from servicemen who passed through Union Station on their way to assignments during World War II.
The soldiers were very nice, all of them were very nice, and they would kid with us, but you could tell they were very nervous because there was wartime, you know. They always left 10 cents for a tip. But see, we was only getting 42 cents an hour. 42 cents, and our tips were tremendous.
Quarter tips were available in the Westport Room, a favorite spot for travelers and Kansas Cityans who had a little more time for a leisurely meal.
It was well-presented food, so far different than it was originally along the train lines. In fact, that's why Fred Harvey got this whole idea started, was that along the lines the food was so bad that he said, he was a freight agent, and he said, well, if the food is that bad, surely I can do better than that. And that's how he got started with them.
The Fred Harvey Company grew to more than 100 restaurants and lodges throughout the country, leaving a legacy not only on the restaurant industry, but in the hearts of nearly 100,000 Harvey Girls who donned those crisp white aprons.
The doors closed on this Union Station location in 1968, retiring the Harvey Girls, whose stories are part of our scrapbook of memories of this grand old place. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Most historians agree Jesse James was a murderer and a thief who died before his 35th birthday. During the course of 16 years, the James gang robbed banks and trains and stagecoaches, and dozens of innocent people died. If it hadn't been for the Civil War, some speculate Jesse probably would have been a Baptist minister, like his father, and Frank would have been a school teacher. History, however, records a different account. Many stories surround the legend of Jesse James, some true, some not. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, through the storytelling of Sanford Lee, we're taking you back 150 years to a tale about one of the most notorious criminals in our country's history.
This is the home where Frank and Jesse James were raised, and if these walls could talk, they would tell some incredible stories. My grandmother used to tell me a story about an old lady who lived in a small farm in rural Missouri. It was about 1870. One morning, two mysterious strangers came to her door. They asked her if she'd fix them a meal. They'd been on the road for several days and hadn't eaten, and they were willing to pay for it. Well, they seemed nice, polite young men, so she invited them in. As she fixed their meal of beans and rice and biscuits, she told them of her woes, her troubles. Her husband had died just 2 years before. Nobody was working her farm. She had no income. And that very day, a fellow from the bank was going to come and repossess her home because she owed the bank $800. Well, the gentleman ate quietly, and when they finished, one stood up, reached in his pocket, took out a roll of bills, and counted out $800 and handed it to her, said, "You take this, ma'am. You remind me of my mother. Besides, I told you we'd pay you for our meal." She said, "But it was just beans and rice and biscuits." He said, "Yes, ma'am, but those were the finest biscuits I've ever had." They left her peacefully and went on their way. Later that afternoon, the fellow from the bank came with the foreclosure papers. She handed them back to him, along with the $800 in cash she'd been given, and she said, "Now I want a receipt, paid in full." When he went back to town, he was stopped in the road by two mysterious strangers who relieved him of his $800, his gold watch, and his horse. When he walked back into town, he reported the incident to the sheriff. And on the wall, he saw two wanted posters for the very men who had robbed him that day. It was Frank and Jesse James.
According to most accounts, Jesse died April 3rd, 1882, and was buried here in Kearney, Missouri. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Nowadays, we can order a fancy dinner by fax or contact the babysitter by email. But at 5:45, when the car phone rings, often it's the age-old question, can you pick up some milk on the way home? Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Many of us in Kansas City remember a more convenient time when the milk came to us. Yes, long before convenience stores and drive-through windows, a fleet of milk trucks and a small army of milkmen brought fresh milk right to our door.
Generations of Kansas Cityans lick their lips when they hear the words Country Club Dairy. It was here at 56th and Troost that a squadron of delivery trucks loaded up every morning with what many believe were the best-tasting dairy products in town. In 1927, J.V. and C.B. Quigley formed a partnership with the most progressive dairymen in the area and founded the Country Club Dairy, selling and delivering only properly pasteurized whitelist milk.
J.V. went to see the doctors and called on different doctors and told them what his product was, what the product was at the dairy. The doctors liked it. The doctors were glad to have a dairy where they knew the milk was pasteurized and safer for a child.
By the 1950s, the Country Club Dairy employed 400 people. At the height of the post-war baby boom, the Quigleys and their partners sold almost 1 million pounds of milk a day. Men like Clarence Gregory and Bill Johns were a welcome sight in Kansas City's neighborhoods.
Those days, early in the late 40s, early 50s, most of the ladies were home, so it was no problem to get in the house. However, if they weren't home, I carried about 90% of the keys to the route. If I didn't have the key, it was under the mat, on the lamp, or behind the mailbox. If I didn't have the key or access to the house, the door was left open, and we went in, took care of the milk business, turned off the stoves, put the cat out, mailed the letters, and that was about the history of the dairy industry.
The kids in the neighborhood in the summertime, when they pile in the truck to get the loose ice needed. And we'd come out, we'd have to run them out. We'd get down to the next stop, get out, and the kids were back in the truck again. And that happened lots of times in different neighborhoods.
Home deliveries were handy, but it was the Country Club Dairy's enormous soda fountain, the thick chocolate shakes, the nickel ice cream cones, and the scrumptious flying saucer sundaes that sparks the fondest memories. The Quigley brothers' plan to make and sell safe milk products was so successful the Country Club Dairy was ultimately acquired by a national operator. Families got smaller and the deliveries ceased. In 1976, most of the old dairy was torn down, leaving only the taste of nostalgia for generations of Kansas Cityans.
The Country Club Dairy makes you hungry for the old times, doesn't it? For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
In 1898, dies were cast in the small Missouri town of Nevada that would give Kansas Cityans and people all over the country something to look up to.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today we look up to William Franklin Norman and how he and a handful of others took the ceiling over our heads to a crossroads.
At the turn of the century, a stroll by the W.F. Norman Company would be quite jarring. A constant crashing noise, the earth literally shook. It was Mr. Norman pounding a good business out of tin. Mr. Norman was affording the average person a chance to have what looked like a very expensive, hand-carved plaster ceiling.
When my grandfather made a deal with a local tinner, John Berghauser, they started the business in 1898, which is the 100th anniversary of the company. So they made quite a success of it.
For the next 3 decades, W.F. Norman put his stamp on the architecture of the country. His tin ceilings were hanging in churches, banks, shops, and homes in Kansas City and across the land. But the Great Depression brought new construction to a halt, and in order to keep his drop hammer presses from doing the same, W.F. Norman reshaped his tin company, making metal shower enclosures, caskets, and temporary grave markers. The tin ceiling business appeared to be dead and buried.
But 1930 was the time when architectural designs were changing and people just simply didn't want it.
Then in 1978, modern-day tin man Bob Quitno and his family bought the W.F. Norman Company and discovered a national treasure. The old dies were still there, stacked to the ceiling.
We had to learn how to make the ceilings again. We had to figure out how the stamping process worked. We had to get some literature. We copied a 1909 catalog that we still send out. We had to figure out the kind of metal to be used. There was a lot of trial and error in determining how to make them, and quite a few months figuring out how we could make the ceilings again. Nobody around here still remembered how to make them.
Today, the Quitno family carries on the legacy of W.F. Norman. As one of only 2 such manufacturers in the country, the W.F. Norman Company pounds out tin ceilings the same way the company did in 1898.
We don't know of any modern equipment that can make it better. Those drop hammers can be dropped from varying heights. They're easy to repair. We've seen some ceilings made with more modern equipment that don't seem to have the detail ours do, and we think it's the best equipment we know of to make the ceilings.
I didn't think it would ever come back, but it's made a marvelous renaissance.
With W.F. Norman ceilings installed in impressive new structures like this, the future of the tin business is looking up. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
What made the men of old Kansas City so stout-hearted and healthy, so vigorous and full of good cheer? Why, beer, of course. Good old-fashioned ales and lagers brewed right here in Kansas City. Thousands of barrels of locally made elixir were served up fresh and hearty to cattle drovers, streetcar conductors, and directors of banks.
I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Before Prohibition, brewing beer was a big business in town. Kansas City was never a match for St. Louis, but there was a time when it aimed to be.
With their duffel bags and steamer trunks, Kansas City's early arrivals brought with them a taste for beer. By 1858, a handful of immigrants had begun lovingly brewing their famous liquid bread.
My family's history in the beer business in Kansas City had kind of an unusual beginning. My great-grandfather, James Flanagan, settled in Kansas City in 1881. He was an Irish immigrant, and he started out as a saloon keeper. He owned a tavern in the West Bottoms on about 1700 West 9th Street, known as James Flanagan's Place. It supposedly had the longest bar in the world and was located on what was known as the wettest block in the world, where 23 of the 24 buildings in the vicinity were saloons.
One of Kansas City's best-known brewers was the Hyde family. In 1887, they established a massive brewery complex in the East Bottoms that brewed up hundreds of thousands of barrels of Charnagle Select and Barish. The Hydes even built an amusement park and beer garden on site, with a direct pipeline to the brewery, and had their own streetcar line.
Michael Hyde, one of the three and the youngest of the Hyde brothers, started Electric Park. Electric Park was one of the most fantastic amusement parks in the country at its time. If you look from a historical perspective, the breweries that were open in pre-Prohibition Kansas City, the owners of those plants were very, very wealthy families. The wealth that they managed to gain from the sales of their beer in this town all went back to community and civic-minded things. The park and recreation systems, the boulevards, buildings, obviously the Mulecke Hotel, the electric park, the whole idea of the amusement industry, the entertainment industry in this city, all those things were helped develop in the early stages of the city's development by the owners of the breweries.
With repeal and the welcome respite from bathtub gin, beer making returned to Kansas City. One of the only survivors was Mulecke's smooth foamed Pilsner. The Mulecke family and its popular beer tapped the loyalty of a generation of sports fans. But by 1956, it had spread itself too thin, and the last local beer was swallowed by a bigger brewer from Milwaukee.
The next 33 years, Kansas City did without a brew of its own. But alas, tastes are changing. Beer with personality and a local flavor is in style again. Witness the success of Boulevard Brewery, started in 1989 with the help of an old brewmaster from Mulebach. We may never rival St. Louis, but when it comes to local connoisseurs, there's nothing like the taste of a hometown beer. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
When my mother started us to Sunday school, she gave us a chance to meet the other children in Independence. I met a very beautiful little lady with lovely blue eyes and the prettiest golden curls I've ever seen. We went through Sunday school, grade school, high school, and we're still going along hand in hand. She was my sweetheart and ideal when I was a little boy, and she still is.
In 1890, a young man from Independence fell in love. What transpired over the next 7 decades may be one of the sweetest love stories ever.
June 22nd, 1911. Dear Bessie, speaking of diamonds, would you wear a solitaire on your left hand should I get it? I've always had a sneaking notion that someday maybe I'd amount to something. You may not have guessed it, but I've been crazy about you ever since we went to Sunday school together. But I never had the nerve to think you'd even look at me. I don't think so now, but I can't keep from telling you what I think of you. More than sincerely, Harry. July 12, 1911. Dear Bessie, you know that you turn me down so easy that I'm almost happy anyway. Very sincerely, Harry.
By 1913, Bess decided she had fallen in love with the persistent farmer who continued courting his sweetheart with a shower of letters. As Harry left for duties during World War I, Bess sent her picture along with a note.
Dear Harry, you didn't expect me in Fort Sill so soon, did you? I'm depending on this to take you to France and back, all safe and sound. Bess.
November 24th, 1917. Dear Bess, I got your picture last night, and I've had such a wide smile ever since that everyone has remarked about it. It is sure a speaking likeness, and I really can't tell you how glad I am to have it. Unless you come yourself, you could have sent me nothing that I'd like better. Yours, Harry. November 11th, 1918. You evidently did some very excellent work as a Liberty Bond saleswoman, because I saw in the Stars and Stripes where some 22 million people bought them, and that they were oversubscribed by $1 billion, which is some stunt for you to have helped pull off. Here's hoping to see you soon. Yours always, Harry.
March 11th, 1919. Dear Harry, I'll be just about ready, all righty, when you come. And then we can settle the last details. May said Mr. Morgan had a job waiting for you, and if you should decide to put in part of your time there, you'll have another home waiting for you in Independence, for nothing would please Mother any better. Loads of love, devotedly, Bess.
On the next Kansas City Crossroads, the Truman love story continues after World War I. I'm Bill Kalahurka. Harry Truman was 6 years old when he found his true love in Sunday school. Her name was Bess. From that moment on, he idolized her, and perhaps he expressed that best through the letters he wrote to her.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. We pick up the Truman love story at the end of World War I, when Harry came home to Bess. On June 28, 1919, soon after his return from the war, Harry and Bess were married here at the Trinity Episcopal Church in Independence, just a few blocks east of Bess's house. Their daughter Margaret was born in 1924.
As Harry's political career soared, he and Bess once again put pen to paper and added a few more chapters to their love story.
June 28, 1935. Dear Bess, this is the day 16 years ago that I made a plunge and took a chance for which I have been a better man. Kiss Margie. Love to you, Harry. July 28, 1939. Dear Bess, I succeeded in getting a real rail bill agreed to and on the Senate calendar yesterday. It regulates subsidiaries and holding companies of railroads. Kiss Margie. Love to you, Harry. June 6th, 1945. Dear Bess, it won't be long until I can sit back and study the whole picture and tell them what is to be done in each department. When things come to that stage, there'll be no more to this job than there was to running Jackson County, and not any more worry. Lots of love, Harry.
June 28, 1948. Dear Bess, 29 years. It seems like 29 days. Detroit, Port Huron, a farm sale, the Blackstone Hotel, a shirt store, county judge, a defeat, Margie, automobile club membership drive, presiding judge, senator, vice president, now. You still are on the pedestal where I placed you that day in Sunday school, 1890. What an old fool I am. HST.
But Harry Truman was anything but a fool. During the course of their lifelong love affair, Harry wrote Bess more than 1,300 letters, a testimony that love at first sight can last forever. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Built to last, a term thrown around so much today it's lost some of its meaning, or at least maybe some of its longevity. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. If you believe that few things nowadays are truly built to last, we'd like to show you a genuine exception today on Kansas City Crossroads, at a place where a group of 32 craftsmen and artists intersect with the raw materials of wood and metal. The result is a creation that will literally last for centuries, and a sound that goes on forever.
Since 1919, the people inside this 5-story building in Lawrence have been erecting monuments to sound. Reuter pipe organs fill churches and universities all over the country with a joyful noise. The men and women who create these towering musical instruments invest thousands of hours in each one, assembling tens of thousands of individual pieces, all working in harmony. These pipe organs aren't built as much as they are born. Listen to its voice and you can't help but be moved. Each instrument is very much a living, breathing thing. Craftsmen like Gilbert Stone are the proud parents. Patient, nurturing, honing their crafts over decades of time. With the exception of an improved technique here and there, the organ makers at Reuter craft their instruments by hand, just as it was done more than 75 years ago. Machines can't replace the human touch, the feel for the sound. Something these pipe organ makers know in their hearts will endure for many generations to come. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. In the old westerns, dusty cowboy hats made movie stars look larger than life. But for a real cowboy, his hat was more than just a prop. It was his key to survival.
I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Regardless of where you found cowboys, on the big screen or on trails to the west, one man is responsible for bringing style and function to what they wore on their heads. His name, John B. Stetson.
In the mid-1800s, brave men and women set out for new opportunities in the West, and John B. Stetson was one of them.
John B. Stetson grew up in a family in Philadelphia that made felt hats for years. He learned the art of felting from his father. Due to health reasons, he had to head west and get to a different climate. And so he settled in this particular St. Joseph, northwest Missouri area.
At a crossroads in his life, he left Missouri and joined the California Gold Rush.
John B. Stetson, on his trek west, ran into a cattle baron whom was wearing an old Hyde for a head covering. He saw the hat made out of felt that John B. was wearing, offered to buy it from him. At that point, John B. would not sell it, so he made him one. Then he sold it to him, and thus became the sale of the first John B. Stetson hat.
It was that $5 gold piece that launched one of the greatest manufacturing companies of the 19th century. And since John B. Stetson's gold fever didn't pan out, he set his sights on the hat business.
The Boss of the Plains hat primarily was the first #1 hat in the Western industry. That's the one that John B. Stetson created for the cattle barons and the people that were heading west, which at that point in time was anything west of the Missouri. They use these hats not only for self-protection, but sometimes for survival, both for themselves or for catching water, raindrops and so forth, for survival of their animals.
John B. Stetson found his gold mine in something much bigger than little yellow nuggets. He went back home to Philadelphia and eventually opened up a factory because the hat orders were pouring in.
Legend has it that the Stetson, as well as just hats in general, became a means of status. And depending on the type of hat that a man wore, in some cases women also, depending on whether they were wealthy, whether they were accepted, whether they were just a down-and-out cowboy and needed something on his head.
Today, the Stetson name is back in St. Joseph. The Stetson factory produces over 1,500 hats a day, much the same way the factories produced the hats back in the early days of John B. Stetson.
But the hat that was worth a $5 gold piece to the cattlemen on the Western Plains can now run you up to $3,500. The price you pay for over 100 years of nostalgia. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
In the 1850s, the Missouri River wasn't much different than it is today, considered to be too thick to drink and too thin to plow. It was a big, muddy monster that's eating habits included a healthy diet of steamboats. 289 steamboats, in fact, from St. Louis to Pierre, South Dakota. And while almost all of those boats were either destroyed or are still buried at the bottom of the river, one steamboat has floated to the surface of history, thanks to changing currents, a curious farmer, and a determined team of treasure hunters.
I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we find the steamboat Arabia in many ways exactly the way it was left on September 5th, 1856, when its hull came to a crossroads with a walnut tree snag.
A side-wheeler built in 1853, the steamboat Arabia measured 171 feet long and 54 feet wide. It was a floating community carrying people and their entire lives down the river. There were even 2 prefabricated homes on board. The 1850s was the golden era of steamboats, and the levee at Kansas City, which was at that time the town of Kansas, was a major destination. But on this autumn evening in 1856, the steamboat Arabia was on its way to Omaha, Nebraska, with 222 tons of cargo and 130 passengers, mostly women with children traveling to meet their husbands. They had just left the town of Kansas and were near Parkville when it happened.
The boat ran right into a tree, stuck in the mud, below the surface of the water. The pilot didn't see the log. It began to fill with water. The pilot knew he had a problem, so he turned his wheel, headed for shore, but they never arrived. The boat sank some distance from shore. The water went to the upper decks, and the people rushed as high as they could on the boat. Now, they did have a lifeboat there, and a little at a time, the passengers were put aboard this lifeboat and carried to shore into safety. And there they stood on the bank, huddled in these bushes and among the trees, and looking out across the river. They saw the boat sink, and there was nothing they could do to save the cargo, their personal belongings, all that they carried west with them.
The Arabia was gone forever, at least so they thought. Over the next century, she would be buried deep by mud, silt, and water. But over time, the river changed course, and the Arabia would no longer be at the bottom of the Missouri River, but under a cornfield near Parkville. Treasure hunters tried to dig down to the steamboat Arabia as early as 1877, but it wasn't until 1988 that a group of men from Independence performed a large-scale excavation. What they found was a time capsule of life in the 1850s.
It's almost like finding a dinosaur bone, something that has never been seen before. We'd never seen a steamboat from that time period. We'd seen pictures of them.
Crews worked day and night for weeks digging to the steamboat Arabia. On the next Kansas City Crossroads, the modern-day treasure hunt continues in this Kansas cornfield. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. The 1850s was the golden era of steamboats, but the mighty Missouri was a perilous path to the west. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, the continuing story of the steamboat Arabia, a ship lost on September 5th, 1856, when a walnut tree snag sunk it in a matter of minutes. We rejoin the adventure of the steamboat Arabia as the modern-day treasure hunters dig their way through 45 feet of mud to finally reach the cargo, 200 tons of it, under a Kansas cornfield. There it had rested since the Arabia sank with 130 passengers on board. All the passengers reached the shore safely, but the cargo was thought to be lost forever, until the tenacious crew from Independence succeeded where other treasure hunters had failed. The thrill of discovery yielded hundreds of crates and barrels, a time capsule of life on the American frontier.
Uncovering this boat was like going back into time and spending our days uncovering and unloading a steamboat that had once been loaded in St. Louis 132 years earlier, and finding the boxes of the passengers and the supplies that they sent west.
Family and friends worked side by side, washing away more than a century of silt.
We found dishes that were incredibly well preserved, still wrapped in straw, coming from England, from the factories where they were made, and shipped overseas, and arrived in the United States, only to be lost in this boat.
Recovery of the cargo continued for 4 months, with each day like Christmas Day. Treasures included bolts of cloth, tools, clothing, hats and boots, shiny buttons, rustic guns, everything an 1856 family might need for life in the West. But alas, all the whiskey barrels reported to be on board had already washed away.
When the boat sank, it was supposed to have been carrying, among everything else, 400 barrels of the finest Kentucky bourbon that money could buy in those days. They thought it was worth $1 million.
The 200 tons of recovered treasure is the largest collection of pre-Civil War goods.
Of course, we all had our favorite things, but my favorite were the food items. The bottles of blueberries that were still blue, and cherries that were still red. But to find food products that you could still eat before the Civil War was an incredible thing to find.
Originally, the crew had planned to sell all the cargo to help cover the cost of the dig. Instead, they devised a way to share their discovery, and these modern-day treasure hunters became museum curators, learning the time-consuming art of restoration.
To think that there are sunken ships in Missouri and in Kansas, well, there really are. And it's a real thrill to go out and have the opportunity to go back into history and find the records of these ships and these boats that traveled and wonder what the cargo would be. And it may not be gold and emeralds and gold doubloons, but it would be other things.
The Steamboat Arabia, a story about the spirit of adventure, dreams and determination and buried treasure. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Long before traffic jams on I-35, people hopped on streetcars to get to work, to school, or to the movies. And no one worried about finding a parking place.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today we'll take a ride down memory lane to a time when Kansas Cityans moved down this path and around the city in familiar yellow streetcars, what some people called a bunch of bananas.
Kansas City jumped on the idea of a street rail system clear back in 1869, when the common mode of transportation was a single car pulled by a pair of horses or mules. It went 5 miles an hour and saved travelers a 4-mile walk to Westport. By the turn of the century, cable cars built in England carried thousands of people each day up and down the city's hilly streets. For a 2-cent fare, some Kansas Cityans could get quite a thrill on their way to work. The 9th Street incline from Quality Hill to the West Bottoms was steep enough to rival anything in San Francisco. The municipal transportation system grew so rapidly that nearly 2,000 streetcar operators were needed to move all the passengers. Tunnels were added to lessen some of the steepest routes. Lines extended to Independence, Kansas City, Kansas, St. Joe, and later the Plaza and Waldo.
At one time we had 32 streetcar lines here, just up into the late 40s, and about 700 streetcars.
Hundreds of streetcars carried more than 250,000 fares each day.
My favorite line was Swope Park. It'd take about 3 hours to make a trip from one end to the other, and you only had to make 3 trips, then you'd be done. Whereas on Troost or Country Club or some of them lines, you'd have to make 5 or 6 trips downtown. But it was very pleasant running that Swope Park. You'd get over there and run down Grand Avenue and Main, and the city was bustling then in those days, you know.
Streetcars served virtually every neighborhood in the city during the course of 8 decades, careening back and forth through the lives of generations of Kansas Cityans.
Streetcars, of course, ran in the middle of the street. Traffic had to stop when they'd stop. That was a kind of a nuisance for a lot of people. I think that was one of the reasons they took them off.
The streetcar operators switched to the rubber-tired, go-anywhere buses we know today.
After the war, of course, everybody bought cars, and that took a lot of people off the streetcars and buses.
Old 779 braked for the last time at 75th and Warnell on June 23, 1957. The end of our streetcars marked the end of an era when people traveled around the city together, forming a close-knit community. People courted and fell in love on the streetcars and waved at Santa, who spread holiday wishes along the streetcar routes. Listen for that familiar streetcar bell ringing through our memories. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Her name is Connie, and those who know her truly love her. But this isn't an ordinary love story, because Connie isn't an ordinary object of affection. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Connie is a Lockheed Super G Constellation propeller airplane, a very unromantic name for an airplane that an entire generation of Kansas Cityans became very romantic about.
Everybody knows what a Connie is. Outside of the girl's name, it's the only airplane ever called a Connie, and it's stuck. That's kind of short for Constellation. It became a short, lovable term that everybody applied to it, and it just stuck.
Connie was born in 1946 to the Trans World Airline fleet. She was the best of the best.
The majority of their fleet at that time was Constellation because that was the biggest, best, fastest airliner in the world at the time.
In the 1940s, aviation history was at a crossroads. Before the Connie, no other airliner had taken commercial passengers across the Atlantic.
856 Constellations were built by Lockheed at Burbank, California. TWA here in Kansas City had 147, which was more than any other airline in the world.
Connie's 10,000 gallons of fuel could keep her in the air for 26 hours, making her a transportation legend, carrying families and businessmen to destinations they would have normally reached by ocean liner.
When the Connie went in service after the war, it pretty much put the ocean liner out of business because it was so much faster and more comfortable, say 12, 14 hours instead of 5 days to cross the ocean.
But history has a way of repeating itself, and Connie found herself at another crossroads when a new plane began to take off.
Then along come Mr. Boeing with his 707, and he put the Connie out of business.
The reason it was overcome was because of progress. The jets were just faster and cheaper to operate.
So in the late 1960s, Connie was banished to a graveyard until pilots, mechanics, and enthusiasts created the Save a Connie group here in Kansas City. And in 1986, Connie found herself back in the hands of those who loved her and wanted to put her back in the air.
It's such a beautiful airplane, and as close as it came to being scrapped, I think it would probably say thank you. And let's go fly again.
Today, the Save a Connie group still pledges their undying devotion to this flying museum here at Kansas City's downtown airport, where it seems Connie will always be courted by the men who love her. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
As you wander about our fair city, listen for the water. Sometimes you'll hear it gently trickling, and sometimes you'll hear it gushing. And sometimes you'll simply see it reflecting back at you.
It's hard to imagine Kansas City without its fountains, but the city came to an economic crossroads as recently as the 1960s, and the fountains were turned off. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today we trace the beginnings of the fountains to a time before the turn of the century, to thousands of horses and a few concerned ladies of the Humane Society.
The early fountains were mostly utilitarian, and I'm pleased to say that the Humane Society and the women that were in it raised the money for the very first one. It's hard to believe, but in Kansas City at that time, we had 60 to 70,000 horses in this town every day. We really needed some place for everybody to get a drink.
Kansas City soon progressed from utilitarian fountains to more ornate ones that soon proved quite difficult to care for.
The one in Electric Park, for example, I think of it, was a fantastic thing, and a lot of people enjoyed it, but it was very cumbersome and large, and it just could not be maintained.
The cost of maintaining the public fountains soon became more than the city could afford, and fountains moved further down the list of priorities, until Ilis Davis was elected mayor.
When Ike Davis was elected mayor, it was after a very turbulent time in our history. There were 4 years, from 59 to 63, when we had nearly a dozen city managers. The city was nearly broke. And the fountains were all turned off, as incredible as that seems now.
During the first year of Mayor Davis's administration, the city passed an earnings tax. When Frank Vadic was hired by the Park Board in 1964, he succeeded in applying some of that earnings tax money to the fountains, and they began to run again.
That buoyed a lot of people's spirits, and by 1974, then the City of Fountains Foundation was born, and we've been doing better ever since. The fountain that's here is a very special fountain because it was done by a renowned sculptor, Sudakawa, and his opinion of fountains is very direct. He says any fountain that does not have sculpture in it is just some plumber's toy. But I think his free spirit with this sculpture does make it lovely, particularly in this kind of area. Fountains are uplifting, and they are beautiful. People can appreciate them regardless of their background. They don't have to go to school to understand them. They are reassuring, and they give you a certain sense of serenity that's not always found in every place you go. The fountains are important to the city because they give us a signature. St. Louis has an arch, Denver has mountains, San Francisco has the bay, and we have fountains.
In 1867, prosperity began to beat a path to Kansas City 200 yards wide, all the way from Texas on the backs of cattle. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we retrace the events that branded Kansas City as a cow town and created a stampede of money and prestige for the city.
In 1866, Texas had more cattle than it knew what to do with, in contrast to northern states where the demand for beef was high. A man by the name of Joseph G. McCoy recognized the imbalance of supply and demand and saw Kansas City as the perfect place to level the scales. McCoy thought if Texas cattlemen could get their herds to Wichita along what was then an Indian trail, he could take them the rest of the way, with the help of the railroad, which ran into Kansas City's West Bottoms.
And the reason that this site was selected for the Stockyards was that there's water here, and there's well isn't a place that they could park the cattle, you know, and come and corral them.
Over the next few years, McCoy's idea paid off many times over. A livestock exchange building was built in 1871, but was quickly outgrown. Expansions continued until 1911, when a 9-story building was erected, eventually housing a couple of banks, barbershops, and a restaurant. In less than 40 years, Kansas City became the backbone of the Midwestern livestock industry, built with cash and a cattleman's good word.
There never was a piece of paper between the seller and the buyer. You said you would give, and the seller said, I will take. There was an agreement reached, and there never was a piece of paper. That was the end of it. And never was the one that backed out on his deal. Either side. Had he been, he wouldn't be here.
By the 1940s, it's estimated that the livestock industry drove approximately $350 million into the Kansas City economy and employed 25,000 people.
I believe it was 1941 in the fall. We had 64,000 cattle and calves in one day in this market. But we loaded out 1,000 carloads of cattle and calves that night by rail, going to all parts of the United States in one night. That's quite a load of cattle.
But as with any business, Kansas City Stockyards had its share of setbacks. In 1951, a devastating flood literally washed away some of the older buildings. In the main exchange building, water reached the second floor.
And that was the biggest mess you ever saw. There's 6 feet of mud in this place, so we had to get it open. Flood happened in July, and I think we opened up in September. And how we did it, I'll never know.
Finally, in 1991, the livestock industry in Kansas City reached its last crossroads. The pens were dismantled and the stockyards closed, leaving only a few scattered livestock traders in a building that was once bursting at the seams.
But Kansas City's agricultural industry will never be forgotten. Today, these metal sculptures stand just a few blocks from the Kansas City Stockyards, a reminder of the history of our city and the industry that made it what it is. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Under cloudless skies, the hum of distant combines signals the season for harvest. In the fields near Mayview, Missouri, brothers Robert and Larry Sonker are harvesting corn. They've been farming all their lives. They learned how to make a living from the soil from their father, who learned from his father. But that tradition is about to change. Robert and Larry's sons have chosen other jobs which take them away from the fields plowed by their father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. The Sonkers and many farmers like them are at a crossroads. While the pattern of the cornfields will change very little in the years ahead, the nature of who farms these fields will change dramatically. What's happening here in Mayview and in countless communities across the land signals the passing of an era. A time when men and women worked the land each day and passed those traditions along to their children, who passed them along to theirs. You see, the land that provided a living for Robert and Larry also provided a way of life. That way of life included many long days, with every member of the family lending a hand. But all that hard work doesn't mean the rains will come. Hard work doesn't keep the insects away or ensure a good price for the corn. Robert and Larry know that success or failure is not always within their control. When Robert and Larry retire from these fields and their sons move on to greener pastures, the texture of our landscape changes. These rich family farming traditions will follow the path of the mules and plows that once worked these fields. A part of our uniquely American heritage dies. The harvest is about much more than corn. It's about planting the seeds that nourish the human spirit. It's about reaping what we sow. Where do we find those seeds of contentment? Some of us seek it in the accumulation of wealth or power or fame. Robert and Larry have found contentment in these fields, in their connection to the land and to their families. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
You see people going like this, they're selling. You see people going like this, they're buying. In the final analysis, it's just one person trading with another person.
The pit. It's where fortunes are made or lost, all based on the whims of Mother Nature and the economic climate. Trading as we know it today here at the Kansas City Board of Trade began on the banks of the Missouri River, where a group of big-thinking businessmen met more than 140 years ago to plant an economic seed for our city.
The history of the Kansas City Board of Trade is not unlike the history of other exchanges in this country. For instance, the New York Stock Exchange. As you know, the New York Stock Exchange started with a bunch of traders trading underneath a mulberry tree in New York. And a lot of that was similar to what happened here. We started out very much like a chamber of commerce.
The original members of the Board of Trade, called the Commercial Exchange in 1856, focused on new roads, bridges, and railroad connections. If people and prosperity were going to come to Kansas City, they needed a way to get here. Their vision became reality, and shortly after the Civil War in 1869, the population exploded from 3,500 citizens to 85,000 by 1882. 1869 was also the year the Commercial Exchange officially changed its name to the Board of Trade.
We were founded as a place where farmers, elevator operators, flour millers, and bakers could shed themselves of the risk of price volatility. A bunch of people got together and started a marketplace.
Once again, Kansas City found itself at the right place at the right time.
We've been around for 142 years, and early we were a very logical site for a marketplace because of transportation patterns. As I'm sure you know, Kansas City was and is today a major railroad hub. That means that a lot of grain ended up in Kansas City.
And that grain never stopped, thanks to a wheat seed brought over from Russia. Kansas wheat production went from 4.5 million bushels a year in 1873 to 25 million bushels a year in 1880.
The Kansas City Board of Trade has enjoyed, I think, a spectacular but a very measured growth. For the first 130 years of our history, we were primarily a hard red winter wheat futures market.
And thanks to that wheat, Kansas City basks in the glory of being the center of the agriculture futures trading market.
We take great pride in the fact that if you're in Kansas City or you're in Salina, Kansas, or you're in Beijing or you're in Sydney, if you want to know the price of wheat, it's the price that is discovered on our floor.
Today, nearly 50 million bushels of wheat are traded daily here at the Kansas City Exchange. That's quite an increase over the first 1,000 bushels in the olden days. The founders of the Board of Trade left us a legacy of prosperity and positioned Kansas City as the world's breadbasket. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
In the small town of Atchison, Kansas in the early 1900s, there lived a little girl full of spunk. Gifted with her imagination and a pure obsession with adventure, she turned her home on the bluffs of Missouri into a playground of imaginary journeys. Eventually, the spirit of this young lady from Atchison would take a very new phenomenon called aviation to one of its first crossroads. And as you're about to find out today on Kansas City Crossroads, it was what Amelia Earhart was born to do.
We'll never forget Amelia and her plane.
From the start, she was adventurous. She slid down streets in Atchison, Kansas, underneath the bellies of horses. When Amelia was a little girl in Atchison, she was always in motion. And in the backyard of her home in Atchison, I'm told that she rigged a sort of a roller coaster toy that could have brought disaster to the neighborhood children, but it was Amelia's idea of fun. Her mother, as we've said, didn't stop her from doing any of these things, even wearing bloomers instead of skirts back in early 1900s, and her father was a very bright, very intelligent man, and he's the one who took her to see her first airplane. And I think between the two of her parents, it wasn't that they didn't say no, it was just that they thought she can do it, and they let her. And when you grow up with people who are fairly confident in you, you develop a confidence in yourself.
That confidence followed Amelia throughout her childhood in Atchison and into her college days at Ogontz, near Philadelphia. Bored and restless, Amelia never finished college. The spark she carried for adventure would not let her rest. So she left school in search of more colorful horizons.
She went to various places and saw airplanes, but actually she really got interested when she went to California and started flying out there. On her 25th birthday, she got her first airplane. There was some money she'd earned as a telephone operator, a truck driver, and all kinds of things she'd done in order to get this airplane.
In 1922, the year Amelia Earhart received her pilot's license, she started her climb to fame by setting her first record, an altitude record, and was well on her way to changing history.
But her first real brush with fame came when Amelia accepted a seat on the Friendship, a plane that crossed the Atlantic in 1928. The flight included 2 male aviators and Amelia. The public admired her bravery because back in the 20s you crossed the ocean on a boat, not a plane. That transatlantic flight set the stage for the rest of Amelia's career in the limelight on the next Kansas City Crossroads. I'm Bill Kalahurka. Growing up in Atchison, Kansas, Amelia Earhart never stopped reaching for the skies. Her passion for adventure was evident even in those early days, when her dreams and endless spunk took her on many imaginary journeys. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Today we pick up the story of Amelia on a very real journey across the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, not as the pilot, but yearning to be.
George Putnam, who became her husband later, was on the selection committee that found that she would be a person to go on the Friendship. So she was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic as a passenger. Well, when she received such ovations there, everyone just thought this was wonderful that a woman was so brave to fly across the Atlantic, even as a passenger, in 1928. She said, I felt like a sack of potatoes. So she said, I want to do it myself. So she set out, and that was her goal, to actually fly the Atlantic alone. And that she did in 1932.
Amelia's flight across the Atlantic gave her celebrity status. Suddenly people were listening to her opinions about everything, from politics to commercial aviation.
It's much easier to fly the Atlantic Ocean now than it was a few years ago. I expect to be able to do it in my lifetime again. Possibly not as a solo expedition, but in regular transatlantic service, which is inevitable in our lifetime.
And today we know Amelia's premonitions were correct, but her historic flight across the Atlantic didn't satisfy her passion for adventure, so she decided to take on the world, or at least fly around it. But from the beginning, things didn't go as smoothly as she had hoped.
She was going to fly from California and go west around the world, and she flew as far as Hawaii. And there was a mishap as she took off.
So Amelia was forced to return to California and repair the plane. Weather conditions determined that she would now have to fly around the world heading east from California, leaving the most difficult part of her flight for the end, over the wide expanse of the Pacific.
She had almost made it, but she just didn't found the place she needed to be. And the mystery remains, and probably one of the great mysteries of today, although there are many people seeking that answer, is what happened to Amelia.
Amelia Earhart disappeared in 1937, but her legacy will never die.
I don't think there was any doubt that Amelia Earhart brought women into the 21st century and was a role model to many people who would never have dared to fly.
There's some people, that come through this world, like the great musicians, Beethoven and Mozart and all these people. And I think Amelia goes right in with that group of people, a very special person that was put here for a special reason.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Here in the heart of Kansas City is a story about a young salesman from David City, Nebraska, who lived the American dream. He started off with 2 shoeboxes full of postcards and built a company whose name is recognized around the world.
Joyce C. Hall arrived in Kansas City in 1910 with dreams and ambition and 2 shoeboxes full of postcards. He rented a room at the Y and tucked those shoeboxes under his bed.
Mr. Hall did sell those postcards and things because that's what people wanted, was postcards.
After calling on local drugstores, bookstores, and gift shops, Hall ventured to towns along the railroad lines that passed through Kansas City. Soon the YMCA complained about the volume of mail the successful salesman was receiving, so young Hall moved to larger quarters. Business was growing by leaps and bounds until disaster struck on January 11th, 1915.
They had a terrible fire that just burned out the entire Valentine line that was ready to be shipped. Well, Mr. Hall is famous for turning a liability into an asset. I've seen him do it over and over and over. And what he did here was get a loan. A very kind man gave him the 2nd floor of his building downtown, and they reordered the Valentine line and got it shipped, and actually bought some engraving equipment and started making his own cards.
The company was $17,000 in debt, but there was no turning back. Hall was now creating his own designs, adding more employees, and making his mark on the greeting card industry. Hall always kept a close eye on the product that carried his name, approving each design. But even with a watchful eye on quality, sometimes things didn't always go as planned.
One of the most interesting was one that involved a little plant that could be sowed, and then it would grow and be a nice gift. Well, somehow or other it got too warm, and in the warehouse I guess they all grew and bloomed before they were even out to be sold. So that was pretty much of a flop. Don't like to have too many of those.
Hallmark's remarkable success has drawn accolades and talent from all over the world.
Mr. Hall received a lot of honors for the Hallmark Hall of Fame. Directly, he received this first Emmy for the sponsor. And I'm sure others have been given since then, but he received the first one.
Today, Hallmark employs the world's largest creative staff and is one of the top privately owned companies in America, a giant in the greeting card industry, and a tribute to a man named Joyce. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Gardeners in the surrounding neighborhood are planting seeds here at the community garden at 21st and Brooklyn. They talk to each other over the plowed ground about the bountiful crop they expect this summer. But for 50 years, the sound echoing over these fields was the crack of a bat hitting a baseball and the roar of the crowd as Kansas City's hometown baseball team triumphed over the visiting team.
The first professional baseball team in town was the Cowboys, organized in 1884. Games were played on various ball diamonds around town.
Well, the Cowboys were a minor league team, and in fact, they started a ladies' day because it's such a rough crowd. They thought if they brought the ladies, it'd kind of calm them down.
By 1888, fans were calling the Cowboys the Blues because of the color of their uniforms. By 1917, brewer George Muehlbach owned the controlling interest in the Blues. And in 1923, he built the city's first professional ballpark at 22nd and Brooklyn. The Blues played in the stadium for 32 years. In their heyday, Blues games attracted 30,000 cheering fans. The stadium was also the home of the Negro Leagues team, the Monarchs. They attracted as many for their games and were said to be a better team than the Blues, or even the New York Yankees.
In 1945, Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson played on the same team here in Kansas City. The Monarchs were probably one of the premier black baseball teams of the time.
In 1937, the stadium and the Blues were sold to the New York Yankees as a farm minor league team. Bill Rizzuto, Hank Bauer, Yogi Berra, Roger Maris, and Mickey Mantle all played on the Blues team before going to the big leagues. Kansas City wanted a first league team, and in 1954 the Athletics came to town, putting an end to the Blues era. A second seating deck was added to the ballpark, and the name was changed to Municipal Stadium. At the first A's game in 1955, former President Harry Truman threw out the first ball. The team attracted more than 1.5 million fans that year.
For one whole spring and summer and early fall, the city talked about nothing except Major League Baseball. It gave everybody a sense of civic pride.
The second owner of the Athletics, Charlie Finley, didn't like Kansas City all that much, and in 1967 moved the team to Oakland, California. Kansas City was without a Major League ball team for 1 year, until Ewing Kauffman was awarded an American League franchise in 1968. The Royals and the Kansas City Chiefs football team played their home games in the old stadium until the Truman Sports Complex was completed in 1973.
In 1976, Municipal Stadium was demolished and the land turned into a community garden. There are no crowds coming to the neighborhood now, and instead of bats and balls, those who come to this field bring hose and trowels. And the talk is not about the games of summer, but the harvest of summer. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. In the early days of Kansas City's fire service, a bucket and a neighborhood cistern were the most sophisticated firefighting tools around. A fire chief by the name of George Hale changed all that and brought Kansas City's firefighting teams worldwide acclaim.
Kansas City's early homes and businesses were built of wood, often close together, even sharing common walls. Because residents used candles and kerosene lanterns for light and they burned wood for cooking and heat, the danger of fire was always close at hand.
Fire was a very devastating kind of thing, not just to one building or one family, but a whole row or a whole block. And if it was a big enough fire and enough heat, it would jump a street and then start on the next street.
As the city grew, so did its need for a professional fire force. In 1882, Chief Hale took charge of the city's full-time firefighting force and drilled his men in speed and efficiency.
George was a speed freak. He wanted things to go fast. It's alleged that he invented the poles so that people could slide down and be faster. He invented the harnesses, the swinging harnesses, that the horses went to a particular place and the harnesses swung down and went right on and snapped on their necks. And as soon as the horses heard the snaps, they started on out the door, whether the wagon was hooked up or not.
Hale's impact on fire service was legendary around the world. Twice, Kansas City's team was selected to represent the United States at the International Fire Congress, where they won top honors. Hale's drills had worked. Kansas City's firemen could bunk out, dress in their protective gear, hitch up their horses, and get out of the station in a record 8.5 seconds, while their nearest competitor took well over a minute. But perhaps Hale's greatest legacy on the fire service industry came with his inventions. In addition to the swinging harness, his most famous invention was the Hale water tower, a hose attached to the top of an expanding ladder. Manufactured in Kansas City, the water towers were available in heights up to 60 feet and were shipped as far away as mainland China.
His theory was if you get into a building and you don't have water, well then you're only half there. So getting the water to the fire was a major part of what George did.
A competitive spirit has always burned in the hearts of firefighters. That drive to be the best at what he did drove George Hale to achieve significant firsts, leaving his mark on the Kansas City Fire Department for years to come.
First in is an honored position. You try to beat your buddy there, and get water on the fire first. That's all part of the service still today.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Colonel Thomas Swope, a shy, reclusive man, amassed a fortune in real estate and is most revered in Kansas City for the beautiful park that bears his name at Swope Parkway and Meyer Boulevard. But the circumstances surrounding his death led to the most dramatic murder trial in Kansas City history.
Colonel Swope, who never married, lived in his late brother's mansion in Independence, with his brother's widow, 5 nieces and nephews, and a cousin who managed the family's estate. In the fall of 1909, Colonel Swope, at age 82, is writing and rewriting his will. It has been more than a decade since he donated 1,300 acres to the city for Swope Park.
He had the idea that all of this money that was going to come to those nieces in particular was going to be the subject of fortune hunting by avarice men. And so that he thought, best we don't give these young ladies all of this money. And he talked about changing his will to put the money into charitable gifts.
But before he had the opportunity to change his will, Colonel Swope died while under the care of his niece's husband, Dr. Bennett Clark Hyde.
It was a Sunday morning. The doctor and his wife came to the household and delivered to the nurse a box of capsules and said, "This is some new medicine that I've prescribed for Colonel Swope."
At the time, no one suspected foul play. But as time passed, most of the Swope household came down with typhoid fever, and Colonel Swope's nephew, Chrisman, died. The nurses who cared for the Swope family began to grow suspicious of Dr. Hyde's methods of treatment.
They wanted to say that he caused the typhoid smell that the one son came down with, and indeed died from convulsions after a very short illness. They had done some testing on his body after they exhumed it also and found some traces of cyanide.
The nurses' suspicions prompted the family to re-examine what caused Colonel Swope's death. They concluded that one person both had motive and opportunity. Dr. Bennett Clark Hyde was in line for a financial windfall if more family members died. So on March 11, 1910, a grand jury indicted Dr. Hyde for Colonel Swope's death. The case was tried 3 times at the Jackson County Courthouse. The first trial resulted in a conviction, only to be overturned by the state Supreme Court. The second ended in a mistrial. The third, a hung jury. Dr. Hyde was never convicted for the murder of Colonel Swope or any others in the family. Today, Kansas City will never forget the gift Colonel Swope gave us, and we will always be left to wonder what happened in that old mansion. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. At first, the rich, smoky air grabs your senses. The beef or pork or ribs are piled high on some plain white bread. Taste buds savor that first bite. The tangy sauce dribbles down your chin. It's barbecue time in Kansas City. You would think we had invented it, but we didn't. The truth is, people have been cooking meat over flame for at least 25,000 years. The evidence is there in archaeological digs. There are references in the Bible and in Homer's Iliad.
In Kansas City, barbecue is an art, a passion, and a slow-cooked institution. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we take you to a place in the road where Kansas City got its first taste of barbecue in the 1920s from a man named Henry Perry, standing on the street corner here just east of downtown, selling ribs wrapped in newspaper.
By 1929, Mr. Perry was doing a brisk business in barbecued turkey, duck, pig, and goose. It didn't take long before Mr. Perry was showing others the art of coaxing flavor out of smoked meat. Folks like George Gates, Charlie Bryant, and his brother Arthur Bryant, who set up stands near the old Municipal Stadium.
That meant that people from all over the city, suburbs, urban, all ethnic groups, everybody came down to the ball games naturally, and when they were there, they couldn't help but smell that wonderful hickory smoke. And that's when Kansas City began to develop this heritage of great barbecue.
Kansas City's hands-on love affair with barbecue continued to grow, with neighborhood barbecue joints sprouting up all over the city. Each had its own style, perfecting the perfect barbecue sauce.
People talk about, well, the meat is the backbone of the barbecue. It's not. It's the sauce. It's 90% of your barbecue business.
Some like it tangy and sweet, some like it spicy and hot.
A lot of people feel that Kansas City has kind of been the melting pot of ideas in barbecue sauces because we have the spices and vinegar flavorings that come from the eastern coast, and then we have the cane sugar and molasses sweetness that came from the deep south. And when you put all those together with the Texas spices, you come up with what's kind of a Kansas City style sauce.
Today, nearly 80 barbecue restaurants dot the Kansas City landscape, earning us a spot on the national map as a barbecue mecca. Visitors make frequent pilgrimages to sample this culinary wonder.
You go anywhere, New York, California, any place, and if you tell them you're from Kansas City, the first thing you're going to say, I wish I could get there and get some of that good barbecue.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. You may not wonder about what your grandparents or great-grandparents did for fun in their youth. And if you do, you may think they did simple things like skipping a stone across a lake. But the fact is, turn-of-the-century Kansas City youngsters were looking for a thrill ride too, and they found it in a supercharged place called Electric Park.
It had rides, dancing, vaudeville theater, fountains, gardens, and lights. Lots and lots of lights. Electricity was new to Kansas City in 1899, and Electric Park turned night into day on 27 acres of the East Bottoms in Kansas City at Chestnut and Gannat Streets. It was built by Joe, Mike, and Fred Heim, brewers of Heim's beer. They originally built a streetcar line to bring thirsty Kansas Cityans to their brewery, but beer alone wasn't enough. By building an amusement park, the Heims brought the whole family, the whole community together. Electric Park also attracted people from all over the Midwest. Eventually, Kansas City began to grow to the south, and Electric Park followed. The Heims abandoned their East Bottoms location and opened a much larger park at 47th and Paseo.
I was not aware, really, of how large it was, except when I got up in the Ferris wheel. And then it was really very striking, and especially at night, where you'd see all the lights, and it really looked almost like daytime.
One of the biggest attractions of the new Electric Park was the nightly light and music show.
We'd beg my parents to let us stay till 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, these 4 or 5 statues would rise up out of the water, and they had lights playing on them. Now, I thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen.
Electric Park was masterful in the art of illusion. What Mrs. Oliver thought were statues were actually young women dressed in chiffon, emerging from the main fountains. The atmosphere under the 100,000 lights of Electric Park was magical for the young and young at heart. Whether riding the Dip coaster or doing the Charleston in one of the dance pavilions, Kansas Cityans fell in love with the place.
I love the diversity of people. I love the feeling of seeing the barkers and seeing the clowns that would walk around. And just the feeling that somehow there was a wonderful community of just such different people.
Much of Electric Park was destroyed by fire in 1925. After repairs, the dance pavilion and the swimming pool remained open until 1934. Then fire struck again, and Electric Park went dark forever.
The impression was so great that every time I go down the Paseo, always I'd see Electric Park. I do today.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
There you go.
The rich colors of Kansas City's tapestry can be found here at the city market, where generations of farmers have brought fresh produce, first in buggies and wagons, then in pickup trucks. Since 1857, farmers have been sharing their bounty with us city folks.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. The activity around us today is very similar to what early settlers were doing more than 140 years ago in this space, gathering food for the family dinner table.
When the William Gillis family donated this land to Kansas City for use as a public square in 1846, it was initially used for circuses and political rallies. This was also the site of the first city hall and courthouse, but because of the town's location close to the river, it wasn't long before frontier families began stopping here to load up supplies.
The Santa Fe trade, which started at the river's end, came through this area. And just think of maybe 100 wagons coming through this exact area, pulled by oxen. Think of the smell and the noise, and just the spectacle of wagon upon wagon. One by one wagon would stretch out almost a mile, going south up the hills that we know today at 31st Street, how they ever managed that, and then cut across today Penn Valley Park and over to Indian Territory, which that's what it was called then, but it's the state of Kansas today.
The market was a lively place in those days, until the Civil War disrupted commerce.
So the town kind of died during the Civil War, except for the troops being here. But after the war, there was a resurgence, mainly because of the Hannibal Bridge. It brought more people here on trains, and the market just survived. There's a wonderful picture that I have seen, which is dated 1870, and you can see all the buggies all around the square. So you can just imagine that it was a continual place to buy and sell and make money and exchange goods, and a friendly place that you could exchange information.
After the Depression, the market faced another crossroads. With federal money from the Roosevelt administration to help put people back to work, permanent buildings and covered walkways were added to the site. And in 1990, another facelift added brick courtyards. A few farmers today continue those traditions started in 1857, rising early and bringing loads of fresh produce to the heart of the city.
I do think that there is a uniqueness, probably because of those people whose mother and father and grandparents came down here, and they just really feel ownership of this market.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Well, I started playing it when I was a kid, and I just got fascinated with it. You know, and I love to play, boy, I really did.
Thousands of young Kansas City ball players have rounded the bases at diamonds like this one over the course of our city's history. Dreams of the big leagues were in the minds of many, including a young man born in 1905 by the name of Pat Nolan.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Pat Nolan loved the game, but like so many others, he never realized his dream of playing in the major leagues. But he did become a pro at nurturing talent. And for the last 50 years, as hundreds of Kansas City youngsters arrived at the crossroads of their would-be baseball careers, Pat Nolan has been standing there, ready to help them make their dreams come true.
Pat Nolan is a legend in Kansas City baseball. He was one of the founders of the 3-2 League, originally created back in 1944, giving the sons of World War II soldiers the opportunity to play while their fathers were at war. Then in 1947, Pat began to work with older players in the Van Johnson League, college-age players who were then and are now serious about the game. Pat has always been as serious as his players, and just as honest about their chances of going to the majors.
I had a lot of kids. I told them, get out. You're just spinning your wheels. I said, get out if you got a college education. Well, I try to guide them in the right direction. I really do. Well, if I think they got a chance, I'll tell them. I said, hang in or you might make it.
A couple of the players Pat told to hang in there were Joe Presco, formerly of the St. Louis Cardinals, and David Cohn of the New York Yankees.
Well, Joe Presco was the first one. He weighed 140 pounds. He was pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals. Throwed BBs. Well, his two sons played for me, but he had the desire. He signed one on.
His head has been in the game for more than 80 years, a coach for more than 40 of those. His formula for success is uncomplicated. No one succeeds on his team without hard work.
I always tell all the kids that come with me, all you're going to get out of it is what you put in it. And if you do that, you're going to be pretty good. That's all I tell them.
Pat Nolan retired from baseball in 1985, only to find that he couldn't leave. Baseball was in his blood. And now, 13 years later at age 92, watching and helping young players make it to the pros still keeps Pat suiting up for games at the Van Johnson League.
You're my boy, Rick.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Before every family had a television set, and long before professional sports arrived in Kansas City, families came here to Starlight Theater for entertainment. For 11 weeks in the summertime of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, these seats were filled to capacity for theater under the stars.
In 1949, Kansas City was looking for a site to hold its centennial pageant, so a hard-working Centennial Committee added funds to post-war bonds to begin construction of Kansas City's outdoor theater in Swope Park. The first performance on Starlight stage was Thrills of a Century on June 3, 1950. Hundreds of local residents participated in the pageant, and thousands more came to applaud.
Everybody in Kansas City came, I think. My sister and I were dressed as Statues of Liberty, and then we just paraded over these mounds of dirt.
The pageant's success convinced the park board that outdoor theater in Kansas City was a good idea, and the city council approved more funds. Though neighboring St. Louis had an outdoor theater with a larger seating capacity, Starlight was built with a bigger stage. In fact, the largest outdoor stage in the country. Starlight's immense scenery wagons also made the record books. Measuring 10 by 36 feet long and 18 feet high, they were mounted on huge casters, requiring a crew of men to roll them into position. Opening night of Starlight's inaugural season was June 25, 1951, when the curtain opened for The Desert Song. In the early years of Starlight Theater, the season was 11 weeks long, with musicals running each week. Perennial favorites included The Music Man and The Wizard of Oz, shows that featured many of Kansas City's youngest stars. The schedule demanded the best from both performers and crew, but the outdoor setting proved equally challenging.
We did get bugs, especially we had lights that came on to us like this, and the bugs would just be out there, especially if it had rained or something that came up. The singers had terrible time because if you opened your mouth, you'd probably swallow some. And then they say, oh, go on, keep going.
In spite of the risks inherent with outdoor theater, the crowds came.
In the early days, Starlight Theater was the place to go. It was nothing to have a sellout at Starlight Theater. Almost every show out here was almost a sellout. Then we went through a real dry spell, and hard times hit. And it just seemed like we just couldn't get people to come out to Starlight Theater anymore. But I think it's coming back. A lot of people have done a lot of things right, and I think they've built it back up to where people enjoy coming out here.
Outdoors, it's just a marvelous theater. I hope it's always here.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
In 1894, when farmers looked at the landscape here at 36th and Gillum, they saw grazing land for cattle. But a group of British and Scottish settlers saw the perfect place for a game from their homeland. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we walk the course of history through the eyes of the Kansas City golfer.
A group of the early affluent people of Kansas City lived around Hyde Park, and they had a club called the Hyde Park Country Club, also called the Hyde Park Tennis Club, and out of that little club, which had been founded, I think, in 1892, came the Kenwood Golf Links in 1894.
With only 5 holes, the Kenwood Golf Links didn't look that much different than it did when it was a pasture land. In fact, a golfer's hazards still included cows, deer, and the occasional scoff from tennis players from the club. But the attitudes quickly changed.
Golf became so important that they decided to abandon that club, come to another location. They got on bikes, drove all through here on their bikes, and decided this was an ideal place.
This ideal place was what is now Luce Park. And by 1899, Kansas City had its first 18-hole golf course.
It was a lot shorter than today's courses. The equipment was less sophisticated. It was much harder to get a ball up and down on the greens in those days. It wasn't a Pebble Beach, but it was a wonderful golf course for its time.
Course maintenance was important, even in those days.
Early on, they used sheep, and there's evidence that they used sheep here too, to keep the rough down and to maintain the course.
As the years passed, golf grew, and by 1906, Kansas City had its first public course.
In September of 1906, the professional at the Kansas City Country Club got together with a professional at Evanston, whose name was Jim Dalglish, and who is regarded as the father of golf in Kansas City. And they started pushing the park department to use Swope Park for a golf course, which happened in 3 weeks and $200 or $300.
By the 1920s, there were 25,000 golfers in Kansas City. And with the exception of World War II, when play nearly halted here and elsewhere, the game of golf has been growing. Today, there are nearly 70 courses in the Kansas City area, on par with the passion of Kansas City's first lovers of the game. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. We live in a city of generous people. In our 150-year history, there have been countless acts of kindness and goodwill, from people rich and poor. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, the story of two sisters born in the mid-1800s who dedicated their lives to the healing of children. Dr. Alice Berry Graham, a dentist, and Dr. Catherine Berry Richardson, a physician, lived during a perilous time for children in Kansas City.
The plight of children in the 1890s, particularly with the westward expansion of the country, posed several problems. Childhood illness, infant death were significant issues. Many of the medicines and treatments that we know today have not really emerged. There were also a great number of children who in that period of time were born into homes where they simply couldn't be cared for. Many of them existed often in a street environment.
So starting with a single bed in 1897, Graham and Richardson began to save those children from the street and developed the Free Bed Fund Association for sick, crippled, deformed, and ruptured children, renting bed space wherever they could and counting on the kindness of strangers.
She very much felt that the contributions needed to be from the individuals of the community. The strength of the movement was very much dependent upon the support of the community, and so they looked towards the individual participants. No gifts were too small.
By 1904, their grassroots movement grew into Mercy Hospital.
In front of the old hospital on Highland Avenue, they used to keep a board in which they daily put out the list of needs for the hospital: dozen eggs, case of milk, linens, and the hopes that people who went by would contribute.
Mercy Hospital grew each year. Then in 1913, as the two sisters considered expanding to a larger hospital, Dr. Graham passed away.
The cornerstone that now lies in that hospital carries an inscription which dedicates the hospital to Dr. Graham and to the notion that the hospital will forever be a hospital in which anybody can come for care regardless of their background or their ability to pay. The doors would be open to everyone.
Today, Children's Mercy Hospital, located on Hospital Hill, continues the legacy of Dr. Graham and Dr. Richardson, two sisters who unselfishly gave a generation of Kansas City children their healing hands and open hearts, and taught us all how to give.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Establishing a school for the children of Kansas City's frontier families was the vision of Father Bernard Donnelly, a priest who believed passionately in education. In December of 1865, Father Donnelly dispatched a letter to St. Louis, asking the Mother General of the Sisters of St. Joseph to send a few teachers to Kansas City to start an academy for young ladies. 6 sisters came, and on August 4th, 1866, they opened the doors of the city's first school, and they called it St. Teresa's Academy.
Catholics and Protestants had asked for a school to be started here in Kansas City for the girls. Also, there was no economic line. Rich and poor were accepted and treated equally. We had French people, we had English people, we had Americans, we had Spanish people. So it was very ecumenical even at that time, which I think is wonderful, and it continues to this day.
This bell echoed over the bluffs at Quality Hill, summoning the young students to school. Enrollment was brisk from the very first day, as more families settled in this growing metropolis overlooking the Missouri River. Young ladies came not only from Kansas City, but from neighboring towns in Kansas and Missouri.
It was built as a school where children could be housed and boarded because the parents lived too far away. They couldn't really bring their children daily.
Iron gates were installed and locked promptly at 8 p.m. to protect the girls from the brawling city and to keep out gunmen, gamblers, and undesirables like Jesse James. In 1910, the sisters and students said goodbye to Quality Hill and followed the city's migration southward. Sister Evelyn O'Neill relocated the academy to the Windmoor campus on the present site at 5600 Main.
Windmoor is the title that she gave it because of all of the wind that you felt on this campus at the time. It was so strong and still is.
Early curriculum included the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and also chemistry, languages, instrumental music, needlework, and the making of artificial flowers.
They wore uniforms at that time, as the girls still do today. They wore black dresses, black alpaca, and they had black hats with a little red ribbon around it.
When the sisters added the College of St. Teresa in 1916, the academy clearly became a college preparatory school. By 1962, the college had outgrown the facilities on Main Street and had moved to 119th and Warnell with a new name, Avila College. Now, with more space at 5600 Main, the enrollment at St. Teresa's Academy doubled. Continued growth marked the 1970s and 80s, as more parents wanted an all-girls school for their daughters.
Today, St. Teresa's Academy holds the distinction of being the oldest school west of the Mississippi, still operating as an academy for young women. Quite a legacy to those courageous Sisters of St. Joseph, who first introduced education to this bustling city on the bluffs. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Imagine a time when there was no such thing as a supermarket. We simply picked up a telephone and told a friendly voice from the neighborhood grocer what we needed to fill the pantry. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. 100 years ago, many Kansas Cityans had their groceries delivered to their door, courtesy of Fred Wolferman's Good Things to Eat. In 1888, Louis Wolferman bought his first grocery store at 9th and Oak in downtown Kansas City. Named after his son Fred, his growing business soon moved into a two-story building at 1108 Walnut.
1108 Walnut building was just like darn near like a city in itself. Had 4 restaurants in there, had the grillette in the basement, and they had the fountain on the first floor, and they had the balcony around the store, and had the tiffin room upstairs. And they could seat 600 people at a time.
And of course, it had groceries. Originally, big red horse-drawn wagons maneuvered through mud streets to deliver the goods. In 1914, the horses were retired to make way for turtleback roadsters. And then a fleet of panel trucks made the rounds of Kansas City's neighborhoods, delivering good things to eat.
People would call in, and each sales girl had a list of people that they took care of. Someone would call, or the girl would call a customer at 9 o'clock and call the next customer at 9:10. And then the order went to the order room and was filled and went out on delivery. Friday and Saturday they delivered 1,200 to 1,800 orders a day from each store.
It wasn't long before Mr. Wolferman opened stores in Westport, the Plaza, and at 59th and Main. At that Brookside store, the legendary Wolferman's Muffin was born.
The original English muffin rings were made out of iron, and they were so heavy that the bakers hurt their arms. They were too heavy to turn. So then we started using aluminum rings.
Though the muffins were an instant hit, home deliveries were Mr. Wolferman's bread and butter.
For the Second World War, about 80% of our business was delivery. And after the World War, then we had to go into self-service. And our stores were pretty small for self-service.
Wolferman's found itself at a crossroads. The war had changed people's shopping habits, and supermarkets began to dot the suburban landscape. By 1972, Fred Wolferman Jr., great-grandson of the founder, closed the restaurants and grocery stores and decided to specialize in a mail-order business. Today, the company is no longer owned by the Wolferman family, but its good things to eat are still delivered to households around the country. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Some of the most vivid memories from early 20th century Kansas City came in round metal canisters from Hollywood. Movies sparked the imagination of young and old. Motion picture theaters were neighborhood gathering places. And as screens began to light up across Kansas City, one theater stood out. Not necessarily for the comfortable seats or concessions, or even for the movies it showed, but because of the way it brought people together. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we reflect back on the silver screen and the magic of the Gem Theater.
Between the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s, I mean, this was a place where, as they say, it was all happening. There were nightclubs and hotels and restaurants and, of course, jazz clubs. And this was the place.
The place was 18th and Vine, and the Gem Theater was right in the heart of the action, even for preschoolers.
My first memory of the Gem Theater goes back to even before I started school, because I lived around the corner, 1818 Woodlands, so my friends, they would bring me around here when I was a baby to the Gem Theater. That's where they had the serials, the cowboy movies. They had every kind of movie that you could think of right here at the Gem Theater.
Because of segregation, there were only a few theaters in the African American community where African Americans could attend. The Gem Theater was one of those. And for that reason, it had great value for blacks. Even though it showed second-run westerns, it was a place where African Americans could go, could congregate to be in the 18th and Vine district, and that is what made it so special.
If we wanted to take our girl out, we'd probably take her to the Lincoln Theater or something like that. But this was a hangout. This is where we come, because we could come and see our cowboy movies and see all the, we used to call them shoot 'em up. We go into the shoot 'em up. And I knew all of the Sons of the Pioneer songs. She be coming around the mountain when she comes. And that's one of them. And then, I'm back in the saddle again, out where a friend is a friend. You know, and then there's another one, take me back to Tulsa, I'm too young to marry. Take me back to Tulsa, I'm too young to marry. Walk and talk, Susie, walk and talk, Susie, walk and talk, Susie, walk and talk with Susie.
With desegregation came new opportunities for African Americans, and the magic of the Gem began to fade. In 1960, the screens went dark. But today, a newly renovated Gem Theater stands as one of the cornerstones of the revived 18th and Vine district.
I'm real happy to see that it's back. Maybe they might bring some old cowboy movies back. I don't know.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka.
Kansas City Crossroads is a production of NBC 41, proud to bring you the stories of the people and events that have shaped our rich heritage.